Hello and welcome. On this program, we're going to be talking about some activities that are being undertaken by religious organizations in pursuit of housing justice, housing equality. And it's my pleasure to be talking with the Executive Director of the Interfaith Assembly on housing, homelessness and housing. I always get that wrong. Homelessness and housing. Marc Greenberg. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you, Michael.
You have some activities coming up in the spring of 2011.
We do.
Some that you're doing by yourselves, some that you're doing in cooperation with other organizations.
Yes, actually, the activities really started on the weekend of May 13th, 14th, 15th with housing Sabbaths that took place in about 20 congregations across the city.
Where they incorporated into their liturgy the
text having to do with housing justice, and had postcards signed to send to the governor and the legislature. In addition, we had about 40 clergy sign on to a letter to the governor and the legislature asking that they be champions of people who are in need of rent regulations. As we know, rent regulations set to sunset on June 15th, and 2.5 million New Yorkers are depending upon these laws to be renewed and we hope strengthened. So that was the beginning of our activities, and then that was done in partnership with Brooklyn Catholic Charities, with Habitat for Humanity, and a number of other groups. And then
how hard was it to get local religious leaders? I mean, you know, pastors and clergy people tend to be very busy.
Well, that's the challenge.
So how do you get them to do this? I mean, how do you recruit them?
Yeah, it's not that they're not willing. There are probably hundreds of clergy around the city who are willing, who are on our side. But as you say, they're very busy. They all have a flock to take care of. They never know.
I don't know busier people than clergy. I mean, they have a huge amount of responsibility.
And anything
they work very hard, and they don't make a huge amount of money.
Right. And they can have a wedding or a funeral or a bar mitzvah, and they're called away. They have to do those things.
Sure.
So it takes a challenge. It's a challenge, and Habitat and the Assembly and others have been contacting these pastors, and we've gotten them.
Now these are
done.
Which denominations?
Well,
I mean,
Jewish and Christian, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Catholic, Unitarian Universalist, Reformed Church, across the board, and a few Muslims, a few imams. Across the board, I think we know that part of our religious tradition calls us to stand with those who are in need. So it clearly is it's a natural progression. If we follow our faith, then we have to be there with those who are in need. The Interfaith Assembly works with those who are homeless and those who are at risk of homelessness.
You run a training program for people who are trying to get back on their feet.
Right. Half of our work is advocating for public policies that will impact positively on those who are either homeless or at risk of homelessness.
Like for stronger rent laws.
Stronger rent laws, which we have what we call this virtual house with 4 walls. The first wall being producing affordable housing, the second wall being preventing homelessness, which rent regulations are a part of, the third wall being providing services, and the fourth promoting income. And we are opportunistic. Anything that we can find that will promote one of these areas, we do, and we try to get the faith community involved with. We've been working closely, as you know, with the Real Rent Reform campaign to try to promote strengthening of the rent laws. And so and actually, starting on the 15th, with this Housing Justice Sabbath, we then are moving into a series of tent cities, and they're just in the process of being finalized, starting most likely in Brooklyn, on I think the 24th of May, and then we're looking to go into Queens the 26th, and then take the holiday off, and then in Manhattan on the 28th, 29th, 30th, actually 29th, 30th, and 31st. And then on June 1st, the Assembly is organizing its 26th annual Interfaith Convocation for Housing Justice.
You've been doing this for 26
years. This is about 26th year. We have an interfaith service with leaders of different faiths. This year we're starting at Grace Church, which is Broadway and 10th Street.
In Manhattan.
And then we'll be joined by participants of other tent cities in Manhattan the day before. So June 1st, which is a Wednesday night, we'll be starting at Broadway and 10th and marching 1.5 miles down to City Hall and having that night's tent city in City Hall.
That's the overnight vigil.
The overnight vigil.
Right, which you do every year.
Every year. And when we did this in 1990, the overnight vigil turned into a 200-day encampment in City Hall Park.
Wow.
And people, homeless folks joined us that night. We actually started with 120 people, but the rain was so heavy that 12 people made it through to the morning.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to camp out in City Hall Park when it's raining.
Torrential rains, floods, but of those 12 of us, 6 were homeless. And they helped us to survive, and then that morning we met with some elected officials to give us an idea of what was in the budget, which they told us, but what they said to those of us who were homeless was, but we're here because we're the members of the city council that care. You need to talk to the other members of the council that didn't come. They then said, we want to move back into the park. We want to stay here until the budget's over. We don't care. He said, some of us already live out on the street. We were just told we can make a difference. So as a result of that and working with those folks, we developed what we now call our education outreach or our life skills empowerment programs, initially with Catholic Charities in 1990. We've been running these programs for 20 years now. We've graduated over 1,000 individuals, and we work with people who are homeless or in crisis and transition to help them, as you say, kind of get back on their feet, to heal. We're just in the middle of the first one we've done with women who are survivors of domestic violence who are homeless. We're doing one in Brooklyn with ex-offenders with the Brooklyn DA's office, and as I say, 1,000 individuals have graduated. Many of them will join us that night.
And do you help them find jobs, or do they do that on their own?
Well, we refer them to different agencies. What we really do is we help them develop a support system, and we help them to heal in that they learn to share their story with each other. And we help them to develop the inner resources that they need to be able to negotiate the system as they get housing, as they get employment. And many of them do, and many of them actually are part of our community. They're in our office every day using our phones, using our computers, reporting to us that they just got a job or they just got housing. So they ultimately, they will if they hang in there. But as we know, in the other side of our work being advocacy, there's not nearly enough housing. And
very hard to find an affordable apartment.
Very hard to find. And another event that we want to invite people to come to is a community forum that we're holding on May 19th. And
That's Thursday.
On Thursday, May 19th, at St. James Church, which is Madison Avenue and 71st Street. And this event will be learning a lot more about how the federal and state cuts have affected our ability to provide assistance to those who are homeless and in need. And in particular, we know that there's a program known as the Advantage Program, which was providing housing subsidies for 15,000 formerly homeless families. And Governor Cuomo decided to cut entirely the $45,000, the state share in this program, which prompted the city to then immediately issue eviction orders to 15,000 families. Fortunately, legal aid went to court and had an injunction, a restraining order, but that only is good until June 1st. And the city has not made it clear at all what they will do with what ended up being $15 million that the state put in the budget. And now there's a dispute as to whether it's for housing subsidies or for support of AIDS housing. We don't even know if there's really 15 million available where there was 35 million. So we have 15,000 families, formerly homeless, at risk of going back into the shelter system. And at the same time, the city is really cutting its support of the shelter. So we don't know what's going to happen. We have June 15th where 2.5 million renters are in peril, and we have June 1st when 15,000 formerly homeless families are in danger.
Could be subject to eviction if the subsidy disappears. They can't pay their rent.
Absolutely.
And only in Bloomberg land, or as I call it, Bloombucks land, would this seem to make sense. I mean, if Mike Bloomberg has a chance to throw another couple of $1 billion in subsidies to his rich friends, like real estate developers, he'll do it. But he can't find the money to keep, poor people in their homes.
Yeah, so let
alone, give middle-class people an affordable place.
And the sad thing, when you look at the numbers, Bloomberg is supposed to care about numbers. It costs about $100 a day to keep a family in a shelter. It costs about $60 a day to keep a homeless individual in a shelter. It costs about $35 a day to keep an individual in supportive housing. It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense to throw people back into the shelter system when it's a hell of a lot cheaper to keep them in the housing. And then, of
Yeah.
course, they can work, they can be active members of society. It's very hard to live a life when you're in a
It's
shelter.
hard to do anything in a shelter, although there are people who go to work every
Yeah.
day or go to school every day from shelters.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's hard to believe people can actually find the fortitude to do that, but some people do it.
Right. Well, as a matter of
But
fact,
it's certainly a lot easier if you have a place to live.
and a place to keep your things. We don't have to
Yeah.
worry about them being stolen. As a matter of fact, part of the reason that we do this overnight every year is to remind ourselves, get a little taste of what some people have no choice but to experience. Where do you go to the bathroom? What happens when the garbage trucks are moving through at 5 in the morning and you have to wake up? What happens when the sprinkler goes on and you get wet? And of course, in City Hall Park, we're safe. The police are watching us. We generally have to move out at 1 o'clock in the morning and sleep outside the gate, but we're safe. We're on the street, as we know. Homeless people are subject to being abused, and in fact,
In fact, there have been cases where homeless people have been murdered.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, if homeless people were considered a minority, it'd probably be the highest percentage of abusing minorities of any minority that we have. They're not considered a minority, but many people. I mean, and many of the people who attack homeless people are kids between the ages of 15 and 23.
Yeah.
Most of the attacks.
Yeah, just, being mean.
Yeah.
It's also kind of interesting, I think, to observe the difference in the homeless population from 25 years ago when the Interfaith Assembly first started and now. I mean, now you have families, entire families. You have children in shelters. This didn't seem to be the case that I remember 25 years ago. It was mostly single adults.
Well, we have about 28,000 individuals, including families, children, and parents, in the shelter system. And this year, 2010, the highest number of people ever recorded came to the city for shelter. 113,000 individuals came to the city for emergency shelter. Now,
Wow, that's incredible.
Right?
That's amazing to think about.
Amazing number. Now, the fact is that this doesn't mean that the city has done nothing. The city has provided many families with shelter, but 37,000 less than sought it. And some people of this 113,000, they're not all homeless every day of the year, but they're homeless at least one period in their life. And many people actually don't get enough money to pay for housing through the month, so they rent a room for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they're out on the street. And people are living so close to the edge, and it's hard. One thing I always like to tell people is that when you see someone who's homeless, remember that they're at the lowest ebb. They're at the lowest point of their entire life. Everything has failed. They have no option but the street. Nothing is there for them. Their family is, and their friends are all have abandoned them, or they're too ashamed to go to them. So we find that after we work with people and help them heal and develop a support system, then they kind of remember who they were. They have forgotten. If you imagine being out on the street, not getting sleep for a week.
Well, you'd be disoriented, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to be even aware of your surroundings, I would imagine, and sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, back to the Housing Sabbath weekend. You recruited these local congregations, starting with Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And what did you do? Prepare a liturgy, prepare a lesson plan, or?
Right. Habitat for Humanity actually had put together a whole list of options in terms of texts, and we provided them this set of options. And
so you provided the text and
right. And we asked them that they read one or two of these prayers, that they have a speaker. I know that you spoke at
St. Peter's Lutheran Church, yes,
which is terrific.
Which was
a great church.
quite an honor and pleasure.
Yeah, so. And then we asked the congregation to provide some postcards, and we had hundreds of postcards signed and sent up to the governor and the legislature, and we have a petition to sign, and just to educate congregations, educate congregants that this is an issue. If they take their faith seriously, they need to ground it in reality.